I've just seen that there's outside one museum, there's a massive shuttlecock.
Go on.
Oh, world's largest shuttlecock is a tourist attraction.
How could it not be?
Understandable.
World's largest any kind of cock is a tourist
Do my
attraction.
US road trip now. First stop, Shuttlecock, Missouri. Second stop, Beaver Creek, whatever it was called.
Pigeon Forge. You're getting further and further away every time.
At some point, it's just going to be Chicago.
Yeah. Pigeon Forge, Beaver Creek, Wombat Fort, Chicago.
As we call them, the Big Four.
I'm just making another cup of coffee, so I'm muted.
You're making it at your desk. Snazzy.
I'm downloading coffee.
Computer.
Via the chiral printer. I like my coffee like I like my women. Solid.
Artificial.
Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Gamers Advocate podcast. I am joined with BananaHammockRepublic and AMKomnenos and myself, Legion. We're going to be going over possibly the most important topic we've ever gone over on this podcast. Sex and romance in video games.
I tell you, the last thing I was Googling before you spontaneously started this episode without any warning was soccer thighs.
Are they real? Definitely.
Well, clearly, this is the most important topic because this is how new video games are made.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
You know, one thing I've never really included myself in is the whole romance tree arc in video games. Some games that was the theme. You know, I think of Leisure Suit Larry and things like that from back in the 90s. But the thing is that it is a central theme in a lot of games, and I don't know when that happened. I could even say games like Baldur's Gate, for instance, it was a romance arc that you made in your head, the original ones, but there wasn't really anything that was major there. A lot of times it was just narrative. But now it seems like every game that comes out, there's a question is, can you romance that person? Certain games I've noticed, like Horizon, that came out with Aloy, one of the biggest criticisms was a lot of people were like, I want my character Aloy to romance somebody, anybody. And they made it very clear that that's not going to happen in that particular series. And that's a creative choice. But it is interesting that it did so well despite avoiding that issue entirely. There was some sexual tension, I think, in that character with other characters. That made for an interesting dynamic, actually, versus going all in with games like Veilguard, where you could basically romance anybody. In Baldur's Gate 3, it's an open book, basically. There's actually videos of how fast can you romance somebody from the time you start till it's like a speed dating thing. Yeah. But it's one of those things that I don't know when it started, but really it is kind of interesting how some games really adopt it and others just have to make a conscientious choice and make that narrative actually very clear in order for the themes to actually hit.
I think the interesting thing with romance in video games, we can look at it in sort of multiple ways. It can be romance, it can be sex, it can be really just the entire range of human love, lust, carnality. Is I feel it has matured generally over the years. If we go back and we think about the very, very earliest attempts at sex and sexuality in gaming, I mean, and I've never played this, so this is just based upon Legion's weird reaction to it. But I believe the Samus bikini ending of Metroid is essentially, it's sex appeal, it's titillation, that's all it really is. Lara Croft, we all remember in the original Tomb Raiders, Tomb Raiders, Lara Croft's breasts were just made so explicitly huge. And that's fine. Except we all know why the programmers were doing it. They didn't have a problem with it, but you know exactly why they were doing it. It's so we would all go, "Poor." But you already see at that time the evolution of romance in video gaming. I think as video gaming becomes more cinematic and becomes more self-aware of itself and self-assured as an art form, you start to see already that there are romances that would hold up to today pretty well. And our obvious examples are going to be the Final Fantasies. 7, I think the romance arc is a bit underdone. It doesn't really feel like a principal part of the game. I'm very curious to see how the remake trilogy deals with it. But then you see with Final Fantasy 8, where you have this very explicit, reasonably mature, considering the characters, romance arc taking place between Squall and Renoa. You've got, I think that was a good way of qualifying it. Final Fantasy 10, you
relatively mature, I would say.
Yeah. Final Fantasy 10.
Reason doesn't enter into that game.
You've got Tidus, I'm not saying Tidus, you've got the Tidus and Yuna arc going through the game, and they feel very mature. These feel like romances that you could have made in the last few years. So I do feel as though gaming did reach a moment when it evolved and took itself more seriously, and we did start to see actually love being dealt with beyond just sex appeal, and it's actually been in gaming for quite a long time. Weirdly, I don't know why, but I feel that romance in gaming got more childish in the last few years. I don't know exactly why. It's probably painted with very broad strokes, but I felt as though games lent more into just, look at all these people you can bang, sort of, rather than actually treating it as the love stories that they could be, which is much more interesting.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, but I would probably raise the caveat that the way romance has been treated by the gaming audience has gotten less mature, and the way romance has been treated by developers, I think, has gotten more mature over the years. Like, we talked about this because it frustrated me a bit, because I felt like Baldur's Gate 3 didn't get the respect it deserved initially, because a lot of people treated it like a dating sim. And I was like, this is a game with a solid story that's set in this rich, lore-filled world and continues my favorite game series for a long time. And people were like, yeah, but who did you bang? And I'm like, can we appreciate this as like an art form and not turn it into pornography? And the answer is no. That's not how the gaming audience works. But at the same time, there are factions of the gaming audience that can appreciate those things. And I think Larian is an example of people who put in the effort to make a solid romance arc and actually develop a romance story. It's not just who did you bang. There is a personal development between two characters there, and it makes sense. So I think developers have definitely prioritized having that romantic development and not just the sex appeal that we saw with, oh, Samus is wearing a bikini. I think they've definitely progressed over the years to recognize that you can do more with a video game. You can actually put romance into it.
Baldur's Gate 3 was an interesting one because to go in line with the way you play the game is pure options. Just pure options. Whether you actually elect to use those options or not is entirely up to you. I'm the classic example of I didn't encounter any romance issues at all because I didn't lean into that. So if you said, man, Baldur's Gate 3 is really heavy into the romance, that's because you leaned into it. I was successfully able to avoid all those troublesome waters from the very beginning because I didn't appeal to me. And so it was one of those, like, I get what everybody's saying, but I didn't say yes to a lot of those things. So I was not romancing anybody for the longest time. I was like, I knew where people were going with that because, of course, I had access to the beta. But everything in that game, whether you decide to pick up a chair and throw it, a mop, a fish, whatever, you can throw it at somebody or something. And the game is very into the choices matter type, consequence type thing. But again, it's one of those that gamers leaning into the idea of the romance, then they take it to the step beyond, like, how can I break the game almost with this? Like, I just don't come from that mindset. So it's really interesting that things are an option there. And then there's frustration when you can't, because there's so many games that have to kind of lean into it. You take something like Stellar Blade, which is essentially, I guess, what the Metroid would be if it didn't have Samus actually playing a serious character in the background. But, you know, I don't have issues with things like Stellar Blade or anything. However, there is obviously a gameplay that's been done over and over and over. I don't know if anybody could tell me, whoever has played Stellar Blade could actually tell me what the story actually is. I've had several people who played it and said, I don't really know what the story was about. It's convoluted to begin with. That's not what they're trying to sell.
The games like Stellar Blade and The First Descendant, I think, are games that wouldn't exist without the sex appeal in their games. Like, I think they would have failed. But because they put pretty characters in skimpy outfits, people can tolerate the, you know, grind loop that is The First Descendant, where you just do the same things over and over and over again. Because there's pretty things on screen. We're just adult versions of the toddlers who are like, look at all the pretty shapes and colors. Now it's just butts and tits.
Thank God. But this would be...
We've grown so much.
Can I fit the butt in the butt-shaped hole?
God damn it.
So this is, though, like, the most obvious thing, isn't it? Because we do that with everything. There is a reason, I mean, there's many reasons behind it, but why movie stars tend to be generally better looking than the average person is, and why it doesn't really matter with musicians so much. When it's a visual art form, we do tend to lean naturally, I think, towards whatever our genetic, biological, societal standards of beauty are. It's not really a surprise there that this actually happens. Legion, by the way, I am really hoping that at some point in my life I can now use the term avoiding troublesome waters when I fail to smash in some way. Like I avoided those.
Based on our understanding of your ability to recognize romance in games, I don't know that you have the ability to avoid troublesome water.
Just plowing headlong through the whirlpool. Davy Jones, bitch.
Very much recognize things what they are 15 minutes after they've happened. So
I don't want Com to lose his train of thought, but yes, I've seen Com get confused with the whole Meredith Stout interaction. I'm like, that wasn't confusing. That was clearly...
I think that's why Com loves Lae'zel in Baldur's Gate 3, is because there's no ambiguity there. She is just like, hey, let's bang. And Com's like, great, a direct woman, I know exactly where I stand.
To be clear, on my note sheet, which is right there, only one word is fully capitalized, and it's Lae'zel. So, what I liked, as someone who's never finished the game, or got far... is Baldur's Gate 3 did show a range of sexuality, which I think is actually interesting. So you do have people who want to bang earlier than others. People, when they go out on dates, there are people who are willing to have sex after the first date, before the first date. There are people who are going to wait 3, 5, whatever it might be. There's people who are going to wait till marriage. And I felt like Baldur's Gate actually did have people feeling kind of human in that regard. It didn't have the Mass Effect approach of, well, we're going to bang before the final mission. No matter what, that's going to be when it happens. And it did feel very human in that way, which I thought was actually interesting. Because games don't always do that. Games don't always seem to think that much when it comes to sex and romance. It tends to be something of a, we're going to make you wait until you can check the box. And very often games put it just before the point of no return. When you get into sort of RPG games, there's going to be that, pardon the expression, there's going to be that climax where just before the main game finishes and you're driven through to the very end game, you get the end of the romance arc as well. I think it was just quite interesting that Baldur's Gate didn't do that. I don't know how all the other romances go, but I was just very interested that there was someone who was actually just very upfront, very sexual, very quickly in the game, and was very real about it. It didn't even feel... It's exaggerated because of the fact that, like, she's green. It's exaggerated because of, like, the viciousness that you see in, like, the character model. But in terms
Yeah.
of what she was saying, it wasn't that weird even. It was just, you could recognize that in people.
Yeah, I think that was another part of why Baldur's Gate 3 did it well, is that it wasn't just sex with these characters. It was a reflection of the character in a romantic context. So Lae'zel, very dominant. Her culture is very different from ours as human beings and the ones we know in the real world. And so there is no kind of taboo about just bluntly discussing sex within the Githyanki. So Lae'zel can just be very straightforward and very obvious about everything, because for her there's no reason not to be. So it was kind of a further character development. And I think the way that each of the romance arcs, if that's what we want to call them, for characters in Baldur's Gate 3 develops, it does kind of drive home more of that character's personality. And I think you did point out something that was a little odd with, like, let's say the Mass Effect style of romance, where it felt like the romance itself developed over the course of the game, but there was always that point where it was like, oh, this is the time where they have sex. Like, this is, yeah, we had to put it into the game before the end, so yeah, this is how you know the next mission is the last one. It definitely did feel odd that, like, no matter who you romanced, this was the time.
Yeah.
Just didn't really make sense. But I do feel like they approached the actual interpersonal romance well. It was just that they were like, oh, right, sex. That was like a whole reason we were doing this. Let's inject that now artificially at the end.
I think that's exactly the point, isn't it? The romance is really good. It's just the sex is kind of... it's a bit uncanny. It's a bit weird. And I can tell you what it reminded me of. It reminded me of the 40-Year-Old Virgin, with just this idea of, we will not have sex for the first 2 dates, not the first 5 dates, not for the first 10. No, we're going to have sex after the 20th date. And that sort of idea that you're building and clocking through these missions, and if you know however many missions there are in the game, let's say there's 15 missions, you know that, okay, we're going to talk 14 times, and then there's going to be a sex scene. It's a bit weird, and it lacks one of the great things. I love talking about sex this much on podcasts. This is awesome. Finally, it lacks one of the great things about most people's sex lives, and sort of new partners in particular, is it lacked, which you get with Lae'zel, that spontaneity, where you don't feel like you're necessarily building up to something, but rather it's just, oh, the moment has arrived. I wasn't expecting it, but the moment has arrived. Let's go. And I think that's just it's just one of the things that just make that Baldur's Gate approach more interesting than the Mass Effect, despite how much I like the Mass Effect romance arcs. Like Mass Effect, the inter-character sort of, not platonic, I don't know what it is, romantic, non-sexual. That part, they're always beautiful. They're always really well done, and you have these wonderful postcard moments between the characters. Just didn't quite get, I want to say this, just didn't quite get the sex right.
I do think that is still an indication of that evolution of the approach to sex in video games. The idea that it almost felt like within Mass Effect, they didn't want to push too far with what they were doing. So they were like, well, we have to approach sex within the context of a relationship, which means the player playing as Shepard has to make this investment with the person that they're going to be romantic with before sex happens. And that's not how it always works. For some people, that's a must. For others, it's not. Sometimes it's very spontaneous, and sex is how the relationship starts. For others, it's not. And I feel like it was just because Mass Effect and games in that era didn't exist in a time where sex was very well established in video games. I feel like there was a caution there. They were like, we have to handle this delicately, and we can't be too realistic in the way that sex occurs in reality. We have to kind of artificially create this respect around it when sometimes it's more animalistic. And
Yeah.
they just didn't want to throw that in their game and then get an X rating or whatever. Like, this game is rated N for nobody should play it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting, is the idea of it being very early in the progression of sex in video games. And if you're going to be the first one, you almost have to be purer than pure with how you do it, because you're going to set now that benchmark. And if you do it wrong, of course, you're going to possibly set the whole idea back for a while, which would be a shame, because it's not about having sex in video games that's interesting. It's that's part of being a person, and it's part of romance, it's part of love. So if your character is in a love story, this should be involved in some way. And if we want to establish now a footing that other games can then go on and build on this, yeah, you probably have to do it in that more chaste way to avoid any potential outrage. And I remember still there was the occasional bit on the news about how it was a new sex simulator. To be fair, there was no huge reaction to it. I know like a YouTube clip on whatever stupid news channel that was did the rounds for a while, but of course it did, because most of us were gamers watching it, being annoyed at the fact that the news made this clip. They were getting... most people who actually were just watching that channel saw that segment, moved on with their lives. But we as gamers were outraged because we felt personally attacked. So we watched that clip tens of times each, 20 times each. All of a sudden it's got 10 million views off the back of us being outraged at their outrage. But no one really gave a crap about it because, yeah, ultimately Mass Effect dealt with it pretty tastefully. And if you go... So I will always remember when I worked on a ship a long, long time ago that... This would have been prior to like having good like Wi-Fi coverage and having good like 5G and 4G and whatnot. So people on ships tend to be fairly sex starved, and therefore they tend to be fairly sexual. Like everyone on board, it is pure like petri dish sexuality all over. And I can remember one person who I worked with didn't really ever engage in sex with other people on board, because she would say that she had her porn. And what her porn was were romance books. I mean, you know, the kind of books? Like, I didn't realize how explicit they were until she showed me one. I was like, oh shit, okay, can I borrow these? Like, forever? Would that be okay? Gaming didn't get anywhere near that. I'm not even sure it's got anywhere near to it now. Like, we're nowhere near that point, except with a few very specific products that occasionally get uploaded to our Steam pages. To our hot new releases, pardon the expression. But it's nothing new to have sex, in media. It's just gaming had to walk a particularly awkward line as a relatively new phenomenon, as something that hadn't really established its language yet and how it was gonna grow, as something that was for a long time mainly seen amongst younger people rather than older people. Now, of course, it's different because those of us who grew up playing video games, we've gotten older. So we're going to see a much wider subset of society who actually do play these games. But I think 15, 20 years ago, yeah, you did have older people playing video games, but they were much more of a minority than they would be today. So it still felt like an othering thing as well. It was the more dangerous art form for the kids. And now there's sex in it. Yeah, I lost my train of thought a bit of the way through that. Try and edit something out of that, Legion.
Sometimes the court of public opinion can alter the course of a narrative of a game. Even the creative directors who may have had a certain vision in mind for a character have to be altered. And specifically, the one that comes off the top of my head is Jack from Mass Effect. One of the hardest characters to really successfully romance. You talk to her, that shouldn't be the case. You know, she's very open and she's had a very open history. And she was originally supposed to be bisexual. But because there was so much issues with Mass Effect 1 and its sexualization in gaming, that they actually toned it down quite a bit. So she doesn't fit the narrative, actually. If you look at all the dialogues that you have with her, it's great how you're able to, there's some sexual tension, there's other things that you discover about her and that you want to ask more questions, but it often is very difficult to get to that romance arc. But then you look at the character of Jack and you would think probably wouldn't also fit the character to be this hard to have that conversation with, at least that conversation.
Fine point with Jack, isn't it? That there's a incredibly damaged person underneath, particularly in this part of life. It's the impression I get from them. So they have this outward gregariousness and bravado that's there, but it's hiding a person who's really, really hurt. And I think what they're looking for is essentially they're testing people. Is, okay, let's see if you bite. If you bite, I know you're taking advantage of me in some way, or I'm going to feel that way. And what they're really looking for is someone, not to say no per se, but they're looking for someone to slow down. They're looking for someone to respect them for the person that they are. And yeah, Jack is one of those ones who I would have liked to think we would have eventually gotten onto as actually having, in the relatively early days of video game romances and sexuality, someone who had a story that was actually quite dark and reflective of the lives that some people live.
Yep.
And that's one thing that I really did like with BioWare sometimes. I think Dragon Age 3 is the one I'm thinking of, and Dragon Age 2 is the counterpoint to it. And we've mentioned it before. I didn't like how in Dragon Age 2 anyone could bang anyone, because sexual preference and sexual identity is a real thing, and it felt a bit like the companions you could romance. They didn't. I think
that was one of your criticisms of Veilguard.
It may have been. I can't remember Veilguard anymore.
Two is very difficult, but yeah, I think I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Prior to Veilguard, each character had their sexuality, and you had to
maybe it's that
fit into the categories that they were attracted to. And then in Veilguard, it was anything goes.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing your memory of Dragon Age. It's just that they were very well. No. Some people like Iron. Some people like Iron.
Cool with it.
Well, Iron Bull was very open about it, but yet with that sexuality and that kind of like hedonistic ideas that he had, it's interesting because his troop, he has a trans person in his troop. It's great because he's
what's the name? Is it Cream?
Crim.
That's it.
Yeah. And so and you want to talk to this person because they actually have something really interesting to say about some of these things. Not really, I don't go into deep or anything about it, but you to kind of find out what type of soldier they are and what they want to do and how they want to prove themselves, and they have to do it a certain way. And you can tell they're kind of walking a fine line. It's great dialogue. It's great because, again, Iron Bull is, because of his idea of sexualization and his open-mindedness about it, it brings in naturally people who are willing to give themselves to the Inquisition or the story and help others because they have something to give and they don't have another outlet to do it because nobody will listen to them based on their background. That is great storytelling.
I didn't like Crim that much, but it was because it was a minor character and I wish they'd had more time. So it's not that I didn't like them, it was just they never stuck with me, they never registered with me, and it felt like one of those characters where I thought, oh, there's a really interesting story you could tell here if the game had another 3 months to develop, or if you'd maybe put less side quests in the hinterlands and did this instead. That's sort of that sort of idea. But yeah, Inquisition was the one that in my head was the sort of prime example of good, where I felt like, yeah, the characters were interesting, they had their preferences, they had their identities, and it made them feel much richer, as opposed to Veilguard, apparently, where essentially what you're looking at is target practice. And these are just all interested in whatever you happen to be at any moment, as long as you select the right dialogue option. People...
I think we did talk about that when we discussed Veilguard, and the idea just being that the devs probably didn't want to limit anybody, because Veilguard was not a game you were going to go back and replay with just the way the video gaming marketplace is now. You don't have time to revisit a game unless it's something you really love. So locking a romance behind your character creation didn't make as much sense then. But I did think there was an interesting point with Jack and her narrative and her romance not really syncing up. And for me, it is I actually prefer it the way it was implemented. But I do agree it doesn't quite feel like it makes a lot of sense. But I guess for me, the idea that Jack is bisexual but heteromantic is very real and represents a much, I think, a smaller population, but definitely does showcase the idea that romance and sex aren't necessarily the same thing. The idea that you can be sexually attracted to somebody and not want a relationship, that's a very real experience that a lot of people, I think, can relate to. And the idea being that Jack has this kind of this bravado, this almost this persona she's created in which she is saying like, yeah, I'm not gonna to invest much in sex. It's just sex. And then when you play as a male shepherd and you have the option to romance her, you see she wants a real connection. She wants an actual relationship, and sex really isn't just sex. She's looking for that real connection. That makes her character much more realistic in my mind, is the idea that like she is creating this version of herself that can't be hurt, and it's not working. And then when you are the right person for her, you see past that. I think that actually fits the narrative a lot better. But again, that's kind of a smaller representation than bisexual or heterosexual. I feel like this is a less represented group that's being showcased, so it might be a little harder to kind of relate to them.
Well, do you guys have a preference whenever a game is actually presenting a narrative focus, or one that says, and I'm thinking specifically like those Stardew or Animal Crossing clones, because I was surprised to find out there's so much romance in a lot of those games. It's like you go to one town, oh, so-and-so, they're single, there's this and that, and then you start developing a relationship with them. So is there a particular type of game that tells its story, like one that lets you create the narrative in your head, or is it one that actually is just giving you those options and then choosing yes or no?
I'm going to want the game designer to be explicitly giving me their storyline, giving me their romances, because the reason I play games, the reason I read books, the reason I watch movies is other people's views of the world. I don't really want to be imparting my idealizations, my ideas onto a piece of media until I've sort of already extracted everything out of it that could possibly be in there. At some point then I guess it's only normal. But prior to that, no, I want to know, what does the designer think about romance? What does the designer think about sexuality? What do they do? And what did this team make? So no, I don't want to be filling in those gaps. So when you mentioned earlier Baldur's Gate 1, a lot of the romance would be sort of in one's like head canon, I guess is the idea. That doesn't appeal to me in the slightest. No, I want to see what have the designers put together, what's the story they want to tell, what's the bonds that they want to make, which is why I remain bemused and entirely cold at the idea of like shipping communities and things like that. I just couldn't care less.
Yeah, I think the way it was done in specifically Baldur's Gate 1, definitely it showed the bond between characters developing, but it didn't ever progress to that point where they're like, oh yeah, we're a couple now. I feel like a big part of the game was just like, you became very important to this person, you worked together well, you had very personal conversations with each other, and you shared probably enough to indicate that this was more than just a friendship, more than just kind of an alliance. But it was never kind of explicitly stated, and there were obviously no sex scenes, so we didn't get to that confirmation of it. And I kind of like that. I kind of like the idea that like they showed the development of the relationship, and it was kind of up to you to fill in the pages that weren't showcased in the game, especially because of what's going on in the game. It felt like romance was not a priority. It was very much a relationship that would develop naturally from this proximity and from the kind of trust that you had to develop with your companions. But because of what you're trying to accomplish, didn't really make sense for you to pursue a romantic relationship, kind of in the same way that Mass Effect, it wouldn't really make sense because you're fighting against the extinction of your race. Like, you have a higher priority, and you're abundantly aware that the odds of success are very low. So it's like, all right, yeah, romance would be great, but like, let's make sure we don't die first. And I feel like that is almost a reason why that sex scene at the end of the game almost made sense, because it was just like let's get that thought out of my head so we can focus on what we're doing that's more important. Yeah. Yeah.
See, I think I've got a different view on it, which is I would imagine that in these situations, like end of the world, so we're chasing whatever across the galaxy, trying to stop the Reapers, I would expect there to be more sex on board at that point, much more, as people are just like trying to find something good in living, trying to be distracted, whatever. Like, it might be just eat, and I think it would end up being much more casual as well. And you might. Yeah, you'd have romances going on, but I just think there'd be a lot more casual sex on board, which is a weird idea for a video game developer to have to think about.
Yeah.
Like, how do we put this in the personnel management system? Like, although now I think about it, I think I'm sensing my first game dev job. I reckon I've got an idea.
Yeah, I agree that I think that would probably be more realistic, but I also think it would make for a worse game.
Oh yeah, for the pacing of the game, it's going to be weird because no matter, there's a sex scene in the video game. The idea is, well, there's an inherent voyeurism to it. It's not you actually having sex. If you're going to be doing that 35 times in the game because your character's getting down, no,
that becomes what your game is about.
Exactly it. Exactly it. Yeah.
Mass Effect 3 did specifically convey that a little bit. There are moments in the Citadel where people are having just normal relationships, and there's one couple, it's an Asari and a human, that are saying, have you told them yet? You know, because they're a couple, and apparently the human person is married or something, and she's trying to get a divorce. That is a conversation that happens before the Citadel is attacked. Immediately after the Citadel is attacked, none of those type of conversations are going on. It's a very more serious tone at that point. And it's like they took that same issue and flipped it, whereas people were kind of just going throughout their day. I think that was the point of it. They were trying to give like narratives of like people were just kind of going throughout their day, and that was an example. But that would have been interesting to have that conversation after the Citadel's attack, because now things are more visceral and real, and people are going to have to take actions on some of the things that they've been holding on to. So
yeah, and what you have there is then this idea of, so if it's them and it's the guy's married to someone else and he's having an affair, or he's about to have an affair with this person, because now the question starts to be, okay, which person does this guy want to die with? Because they're assuming the end of the world's coming, ultimately. So you have an interesting dynamic then of, okay, what's the one thing this guy's going to decide is the most important to him in those last hours, weeks, days, months that he has actually on, and he said on Earth, on the Citadel. And I think that, that could have been really interesting just to have that still going in the background. But I think games, sometimes we do this in video games, and it makes sense because we only have a handful of conversations we can have, and we do have to establish tone. But games sometimes switch a bit too much. As soon as something goes bad, all of a sudden now all the conversations in the town are terrible. I remember feeling when playing Veilguard, weirdly enough, that after one of the towns got burned down by the dragons, all of a sudden it felt like there was no levity in the town anywhere for a while. And I think that that's not the way that humans work. But on the other hand, we do need to communicate that tone with the player, that this decision had gravitas, this decision had meaning. Or in the event of, in the case of Mass Effect 3, we needed to convey that attack on the Citadel was beyond unprecedented. They were really trying to show that this wasn't supposed to happen, this couldn't happen. And we then have that delightful contrast between the relative banality of the conversations taking place before, and now the sudden, oh shit, we're fucked tone of the conversations taking place afterwards.
Yeah, I think that drove home the narrative point that, you know, people were living in this delusion that they were not in danger, and then they were forced to confront reality. And now they've shifted their priorities, and their priority is very much we have to survive first. So I think the absence of that conversation about lower priority topics just drove that home even more. It was just, oh, right, I have to live first. Baby steps.
The more pressing and dire things become, our conversations don't always want to address that, subconsciously. The real life narrative is we're going to talk about anything else except the the looming dark cloud that's over us.
Times in life, like on a bad day, I can't tell you how many times I've talked about sports instead of anything else because it's something else.
That is fundamentally kind of rejecting what the art form is trying to communicate, though. I mean, when you invest that much in realism, you lose the ability to tell a narrative.
You see my 2-hour video on Vicky and my whole arc of why I don't think some things make sense and some things do make sense. Because with Vicky, she was one of those characters, and it'll still be my all-time favorite romance in any video game. Nothing will ever touch it. But again, some of that stuff is stuck in the headcanon, and that I can't extrapolate from what the story was actually saying. But in Baldur's Gate 2, there's a significant story there. You have a very will-driven character who is raised to be cruel and sees sex as more of more or less hedonistic, but at the same time it's more of a tool. And when you're no longer part of a society that sees you as the pinnacle anymore, or the pinnacle of the pinnacle, then you're kind of forced to use what tools you have in front of you in order to get by through life. And so some of that is a bit warped, and you see an arc of a character who sees who they are and what they were and still accepts it, but then takes that forward and says, this is who I am now, and this is who I choose to be. It's an amazing arc. And again, when you see, Banana and I have talked at way too much length about Baldur's Gate 3, about Viconia, and it's like, that's not Viconia, and I can't express that enough. That is not Viconia. And so
I think you could express it enough if you try.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, like I said, I already made a 2-hour video on it. So but yes, if you actually have some character that has some gaps in some of that narrative, you can fill it in with some of the romance and some of the sexualization, and use their character as not necessarily that's their main focus, but it is a part of their narrative, and it allows you to kind of understand kind of where they're coming from in some respects. And when I say that, I think of games like Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk went the other direction. It was very specific as to who can romance who, but there's not a lot of them. And so they take a very long time to get to that romance portion. But if you don't know, if you're a female V, you have 2 options. If you're male V, you have 1 option. It's one of those things that's like just 1 option, really? You would think they would at least make it 2 and 2, or just make those 3 characters both. The narratives are pretty much the same. It's not like you can't romance this person at all. It's not like Judy's off the table for any character. She's available. So it's one of those, like, I get it. It's a creative direction, creative choice, but at least give more options, or at least make it available to where those narratives would have happened, whether you choose in the character creator, male or female.
But I think that gets into your priorities overall with the game. And I think with games where, like Veilguard, like Baldur's Gate 3, where you see that, let's just make it open to anybody. The romance was not, it wasn't integral to the story. It wasn't integral to the way each of these characters fit into the world. It did provide a little bit more character development for each of the companions, but it wasn't tied to who they were necessarily. And that in Cyberpunk, it's very much these are established characters, and we want them to be established in their romantic aspirations as well. It just kind of like a priority within the development team to say, no, I just want them to have these actual kind of parameters for how they approach a romantic relationship. And in Veilguard and Baldur's Gate 3, they were just like, let's make them open to anything. I don't know that one is inherently better. I think one definitely does make for more realistic companions, saying that they are, fully fleshed out and they have this complete personality that also includes these preferences, makes for a more developed character. But if you're only going to play the game once, it's not really going to matter. You're also going to miss out on the possible development of those characters because you chose the wrong configuration.
Right. But I think it does lend some credence to why some characters are more remembered and valued, because you look at Judy, she's very beloved. You look at Panam, she's very beloved. River, not so much, because you really can only romance River as a female V if you choose a hetero relationship. And that was kind of my point, is like there should be just at least one other option that kind of gives some character out there your ability to kind of remember that character for what they are. But it's just like River's just kind of on the outside looking in for most gameplay. I mean, across the board. I mean, I'm not saying he's good or bad. I found him more like Caden. He was kind of that pushy a romancer. Yeah. I just found him very similar in that same vein, and I was like, I just couldn't stand him for that. But like I said, there's a reason why I think Judy and Panam are so much more beloved, and it's just because you have options there. And then Meredith Stout.
I did find it funny that she didn't come up in your discussion of romance, and then I was like, oh right, because there's no romance.
No, Meredith Stout is an accidental fuck fantasy. Like there's no heart and soul in that, and just to be very clear, that's more interesting than sex. The romance arc is genuine.
Yeah, I thought you were saying the accidental fuck fantasy was more interesting, and I was just like, was it?
This is what I'm.
Is that why we've not talked about it so far?
Yeah, that's why I've been playing so much Dave the Diver. I'm looking for that accidental fuck fest deleted scene. Come on, mods, get to it.
I was curious, is there any game that you've played in recent memory where you felt like the injection of romance or sex detracted from the game?
I don't think it detracted from it, but I think it didn't feel particularly interesting or well done. It felt like something that they added in to just tick a box and say, look, we have a romance. And it was Clair Obscur. I thought that was really very bland. Which, incredibly, when you compare it to how good the rest of the game is another thing where what I've talked about before, how much I think the UI is dire and I think the map is dire and this kind of thing. It's mostly because it's in comparison to how good the rest of the game is. So as soon as you have a weak point, it's so incredibly clearly visible. The romance arcs, both in that game, it's so dry. So dry. It's the ring binder of sex. It's just...
I think that that makes a lot of sense to me, because I've heard a lot about Clair Obscur. I still haven't played yet, and I've heard wonderful things. No one has ever brought up the romance. Nobody's ever talked to me about it, because it's just not anybody's favorite part of that game.
It's going to sound like a joke, but it's not. This is a European game. We finally made a game like this out of France, and that annoys me that we didn't lean into that, because we're better at sex than you are. Culturally, societally, that's what we're more known for.
You've never had sex with me. You can't say that for sure.
No, but I have been running surveys.
I've interviewed 2 people, and...
Yeah. Okay, off record. I was just thinking, can I reference the car dealership? No, I can't. That's not going in the podcast, because that's silly. But I think it is just interesting that it's a society that's known for sensuality and sexuality, and it was just a shame that it came off so out of the
puritanical.
Yeah. So soft, so uninteresting, and I didn't need it to be fully graphic or anything like that. I mean, the romance felt dull. And that's such a shame when you literally have a game based in what is essentially Paris. It is kind of missing one of those great big themes of what the damn city is even known for, to have the romance be underwhelming. So yeah, that was mine, and it was really just it didn't ruin the game or anything like that. It was just a bit disappointing and felt incredibly tacked on, which again, when the rest of the game is so good, felt like a real shame. So yeah, Clair Obscur.
I mean, maybe the takeaway there is that you're actually not as good at this as you think you are.
This is just the first time we've been reviewed out of the country. That positive feedback loop has been broken. The developers don't know what they did.
Yeah. And for me, I don't think there's any that like really spring to mind as being like wow, that stands out as just awful. I'm sure it exists. I'm sure I've played one. I just don't remember it. I do think there are plenty of games that I've played that had no romance, no sexuality in the game, and it was totally okay with me. I think because the three of us play primarily narrative-driven games, we play a lot of RPGs. I think there's always kind of that focus in those games. You have a goal. You usually have, an end game in mind from a very, very early point. You have, an antagonist that you're working against. And so having those distractions feels a bit rude, but things that will pull you away from that end game, that goal you have in mind, it does feel like it needs to be done very well, or it's going to really detract from your game. And I think there are definitely some ones that I've played in games I love where I feel like the romance was not done well. And two Final Fantasy games spring to mind. Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy X. I feel like it does suit the characters a bit when you consider their ages, but I mean, everything else in that game is a fantasy. Why can't I have two emotionally mature people at that age? Because, God, Squall and Rhinoa feels like you guys met and now you can't live without each other. And then the fucking first kiss scene in Final Fantasy X happens when Yuna is openly sobbing. She is forced to face her mortality and forced to face the sacrifice she has to make at the end of the journey. And Tidus is just like, now's the time.
And I think
no, very much no.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Which I think when you're playing for the first time upon release, and you're like 12 years old for Final Fantasy VIII, and you're thinking, oh wow, this is what romance is. It's like 14 for Final Fantasy X, you're thinking, oh wow, this is what romance is. And you get like a little older, get any perspective, and it starts to feel a bit. No, I mean, 8 doesn't feel really bad in any way. It's more just, oh my god, they are like young lover intense on each other.
Yeah, it's not love. It's teenage passion. It's lust driven more than anything.
Yeah, and like you said, that feeling that they can't live without each other and whatnot, and you're thinking, hold on, you've spoken like 6 times, and
what's her last name, Squall?
I know that. Pal. I'm not sure I know Squall. Oh, it's Leonhard, isn't it? Or Leonhard.
Yeah. I can't remember Rhinoa's. I want to say it's like
Irvine? No, fuck, that's not a character. Rhinoa. Oh, what's the general's name?
Like Hartley or something.
Isn't the general
Caraway?
Like, Caraway? It's not Rhinoa Caraway, is it?
No.
It's like Zell
Hartley. That was it. I did actually know her name. Yeah.
Shit. What was Zell? Dinched.
I'm a better partner for Rhinoa than Squall. I knew her name.
And apparently Zell and I are ready. Oh, actually, no, I want the general. Give me the general.
The general whose name you also didn't know.
I was adjacent to it.
You asked somebody what it was.
I cared. That's what mattered. I cared enough to ask.
I put in the effort to learn now.
Hashtag communication.
Yeah.
I actually love, in an underwhelming way, because I mentioned it earlier as an example of a one that isn't really there because of the nature of gaming at the time, but I actually kind of love the romance in 7. It's very chaste, very implied a lot of the time. there's not a huge amount in it. Final Fantasy VII Legion, don't worry.
I know.
Resident Evil 7. Actually,
Legion's not sure who the romance is between, but he agrees.
No. I think I'm glad y'all brought that one up because that's the only one that I know. Because between Tifa and What's Her Nut, then if you
don't say you know it, this is not even the surname.
But
Yeah.
the basically, there is some. That's what I was talking about. Is that how the narrative is not fleshed out? You're able to kind of fill in some of those details yourself, which makes it seem more whole than what it is. And that's the kind of narratives that I do enjoy because there's something there, clearly something there, but you're filling in the gaps.
I would definitely say that's definitely more true in the original game. I think the original game left a lot of ambiguity as to who Cloud wanted a relationship with. And you could make certain decisions over the course of the game that led him in a specific direction. But I think there was always kind of this ambiguity where it was like, well, he's Aerith's bodyguard and she promised him a date when they first met. But his response to that was very flustered. He was like, I don't know what to do with that information. And then there's that almost jealous reaction that you see in Tifa when she finds out there was a date promised. And then you see that really wholesome scene towards the end of the game, right before you enter North Crater, where Cloud and Tifa just kind of fall asleep holding each other at the rim of the crater. And that feels like a very implied kind of like they're finding comfort in each other, and they have this pretty long-standing relationship. They have a meaningful connection there, so like it feels like an implied romance. There was a lot more ambiguity in Remake. Playing through that, it definitely feels like there is that sexual tension, that romantic undertone to every interaction you have with Tifa, and I think both of them do it pretty well. I think, again, because of the time that they were released, you couldn't be more overt than you were in 7. You could be a lot more direct about it in the remake.
They did have, didn't they, the deleted scene where Tifa emerges from the chocobo paddock area on the highwind looking all flustered. And the implication is that they've just been spending the night together in the chocobo paddock. And it doesn't land. It's one of the scenes where I'm just so glad it's not in there. It's not gross or anything. It's just this doesn't feel right. I also think the idea that she looks flustered stepping away from that, that undermines it. I think the idea is that there should be relief or happiness or closure there. Yeah. Not like a regret. Oh, look how naughty we were. Yeah, we don't.
When you said emerging from the chocobo, I had a vision of Venus emerging from the
I didn't say that. I said paddock. You need the word paddock on the end. Otherwise, it's extra weird. Jeez.
Like Venus from the seashell.
Pushes her way out.
Exactly. But did you want to close us out for the sexualized?
No, I'm busy playing with my wrist thing.
Yeah, stick it in the hole.
No, I'm not going to do my time. As tempting as it was.
I do feel like this almost needs the calm sign off of, I feel like we've brought this to a satisfying climax.
That shit's copyrighted. I'm taking all the ad revenue.
Yes, but you're here. So the copyright owner is in this voice channel.
And he's still got litigious about it.
Yeah, you have to pay me with all of the profits not being generated by this.
I want 100% of the revenue. Okay. Legion needs to do the sign off because I just want to hear Legion do that sign off. I just want to hear Legion bring the stream to a full and satisfying climax.
That's copywritten.
Yeah. I'm gonna take Com's own quote. No, I'm gonna butcher it somehow anyway. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna butcher it some way somehow if I were to try to quote it.
Do it.
But it was extremely fun. having this conversation about sex with you guys. And
Keep going.
Oh my god.
so we appreciate everybody listening and watching. If you have a comment that you'd like us to review about sex in video games, romance in video games, what was your favorite game that had a romance arc or could have used one that we didn't include in this podcast? Like the episode if you liked it. And we're coming to a satisfying conclusion, as Com would say.
No! What the fuck? No, that's not what Cobb would say.
Yeah. But that's how I say it. So, appreciate everybody being here. Bye-bye.
God, that was terrible.
How is that so bad?